Public Library, in partnership with NYC Public Schools, is offering free lunches for kids and teens all summer long at 46 library locations across Queens. Summer meals will be provided Monday through Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. through Friday, August 29th. Enrollment is not required and there is no cost. Just drop by. For more information about free summer meals and a list of participating libraries, visit queenslibrary.org. Summer is the season of discovery and imagination for readers of all ages. Summer at Queens Public Library continues this month with a wide variety of resources and activities for kids and adults, curated book lists for every reading level, and so much more. For more information, visit summerreading.queenslibrary.org. Medici.tv is the premier resource for classical music, ballet, and jazz programming, with thousands of videos including concerts, operas, documentaries, and masterclasses. And it's free with your Queens Public Library card. Log in to Medici.tv today by using QPL's free portal at queenslibrary.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Purdie. Welcome to Culture Connection. If this is your first time, either in person or virtually, Culture Connection is curated by Daniel Zaleski. It is now in its 11th year, based out of the Queens Public Library. And we are proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters in disciplines that include music, theater, author talks like tonight, and film. And with the addition of this virtual format, Culture Connection now reaches a global audience. Tonight, we're doing a little bit of literature, a little bit of cinema with Matthew Spector, whose new book, The Golden Hour, A Story of Family and Power in Hollywood, is actually one of the just most enjoyable literary excursions I've had in a while. So, Matthew, welcome to the stage.
Hey, good to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah. Look, so the first thing I have to say about the book is just, I don't even know exactly what kind of book it is. Is it a memoir? Is it fiction in your dad's brain that you made up? It's such an incredible blend of styles that somehow just works. And I need to know if you, from the get-go, knew this was going to be a little atypical for a memoir.
Yes, I did. I didn't. I mean, in many ways, I'm still not sure it's a memoir. This is an odd thing to say, given that this book and the previous one that I published were both memoirs, but I'm not really a memoirist by inclination. I don't really love writing about myself, or rather, I don't really like myself as a subject. I feel like the self as a sort of lens in writing is useful, but kind of writing about my own experience, which I think I do pretty nakedly in this book, is unusual for me. And so I definitely had it in mind from the beginning that I was going to be kind of writing at least as much about my parents and about some of the people that surrounded us. And I had no real idea how I was going to go about it. I think that in the kind of earlier drafts of this book, I sort of began it as sort of a more straightforward cultural history and sort of family history. And I just kept kind of running aground after about 100 pages. I probably wrote the first 100 pages of this book like 9 times. And I just kept thinking, this is not, the tone here is not right. And so, and I finally had to realize, I'm not a cultural historian. I'm not a memoirist. I'm a novelist. And I have to write this as if it were a novel. And in some sense, I think it is a novel. But at the same time, I well, for one thing, I was contractually obligated to turn in a work of nonfiction, and I was very intent on like not screwing with the historical record, right? It was like I wasn't going to make up a bunch of lies or kind of exaggerate the things that had happened to me or inside my family for all kinds of reasons. And I didn't want to sort of, get all speculative But it took me a while to sort of figure out like where were the portals that I could kind of responsibly imagine. You know, it's like obviously like their scenes are rendered in dialogue and in great detail, and it's like, no, I don't know exactly what color shirt someone was wearing or what, you know, what they said, or, you know, I don't know exactly what movie, if any, James Baldwin watched on a plane when he was flying from France to America. Although I spent like 3 days like trying to track down in-flight magazines so that I could see what would have been showing on precise. You know, like I spent a lot of time trying to get the details at least as plausible as I could, you know, to get them as accurate as I could get them. And then within those bounds, I was like, well, I'm going to allow for some subjectivity in this because otherwise I just think it just wasn't going to come alive for me.
The James Baldwin sequence kind of just knocked me out. That's it's oh, and I mean, I wish I knew, like, it's one of those like spoiler things. I don't want to like give away some of the magic of the book, but I do want to know that sequence in particular.
Yeah.
What is the balance between making it up and like things that he said to you later, like the next day?
That was actually what was interesting about that was that I felt more comfortable writing that section than I would have imagined. I in fact, in many ways, it's the one section of the book that came out that I mean, if anything, when I first wrote it, it was much longer. It changed very little. I just kind of cut it down for reasons of proportion and you know, pacing and stuff. But first of all, you know, there are a lot of people that you meet or know, you know, in your teens or 20s that you don't really remember all that well 30 years later. I think with him, I remember everything he said. You know, I mean, the moment that I kind of was lucky enough to, you know, lottery my way into a classroom that he was going to teach, I was paying attention, you know, in ways that I probably have never paid attention to very much else. But also, you know, the preparation for that book was, I mean, for that section of the book was just, obviously I reread everything. And it was helpful that he did write, you know, an entire book about his relationship to Hollywood. You know, so, you know, and there are, you know, there were a couple biographies. There was that, you know, so I felt in many ways like, you know, I had internalized him pretty well. I mean, at least as well as you can internalize any other writer. You know, I mean, after 30 years of reading him and after, you know, being a student, albeit not, you know, for one semester in one class, you know, I just, and that to me was this, you know, kind of illustrative of the feeling that I have sometimes that it's so much, you know, it's not a piece of fiction, but that was a place where I just felt the joy of sort of sinking into another consciousness, albeit, you know, the consciousness of a genius and an icon. But it sometimes I thought, you know, I remember thinking in some ways that is, even though this book is a memoir, in certain respects, that might be the most autobiographical section of the book. You know, yeah.
Part of what was so surreal to me personally about that sequence is in the part where he's on the plane thinking about what eventually, I guess, becomes The Devil Finds Work. His
yes
memoir thing about Hollywood. I'm pretty sure when I read that book, I finished it on an airplane.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So I've also had those James Baldwin thoughts on a plane.
Yeah, and airplanes are, you know, I have a thing. I mean, one thing I've noticed over the years is that you can, you know, and I noticed it in this book too, which is that a lot of the most interesting moments in it for me happened when a character was sitting still or staring at a painting. You know, there are these kind of moments in the book where you know, where the kind of physical action is very static, and those are kind of the moments where I felt like, oh, I can really like kind of like run a plumb line into this person's consciousness. Driving, you know, there's Lew Wasserman driving, there's James Baldwin flying, there's Michael Ovitz staring at a painting. Like, and there were just sort of like, those were kind of moments that I thought were, you know, important to me, and in partly because I think they kind of, you know, they allowed the book to have a kind of that subjective kind of dreamy quality that in a lot of ways, like the movies are an externalization of that. You know, this is a book about, the American public's relationship to the movies for 75 years, and my relation and the family's relation. And I think the relation of most people who go to the movies. And so I felt I kind of needed those moments of like real interiority, for those third person characters.
And I mean, that's one of the first things that I think any reader gets hit with. The like, how could you have gone so interior? I thought I picked up a memoir. What is, and then very quickly that kind of just goes, you're just with it because the interiority is rendered so like seemingly truthfully. Like, I'm totally by that you might have heard your dad say a thing that a guy knew about, and that's why you could write it. And then I stopped questioning it.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there is a sleight of hand. There's a sleight of hand that happens in the first portion of the book, and there's it's even just boils down to a sentence where I sort of say something like, in order to, it starts with describing my dad, and you kind of go, okay, like, he's sort of being subjective about his dad's experience, even though he's not even born yet. Like, I can go with that because, he's heard the stories and he knows his dad, and, all of that is true, the stuff, especially at the beginning of the book. And then when I get to Lew Wasserman, which is kind of the first time that the narrative consciousness makes a leap from a family member into a third person, I sort of say something like, in order to explain my dad, in order to understand my dad, I'm going to have to understand this man who created my dad, and I'm just going to have to become him. I just sort of say it. I just start telling you, like, I just have to do it, and here's why.
Sleight of hand's a great way to describe it because there's a magic trick to it.
Yeah.
But beyond Penn and Teller, there's actually something kind of mystical about the rendering of that. In the Lew Wasserman section, so yes, there is the how do you imagine the thoughts of these other people, but that whole 1950s period part is so well constructed down to the details of the car that your dad's driving and what's on the billboards. And I'm curious what the balance between familial memory, imagination, and hard research was in rendering the periods before you were alive.
Interestingly enough, it was a big combination of those things. My father is not a very he's, as I say in the book, I don't want to say he's not an introspective guy, because I think he does have an interior life, but he doesn't like to talk about himself. He has a kind of slightly evasive, kind of a shy quality. It's very charming. But when I started researching this book, it was a total nightmare, because I would be I would just trying to get him to, he's happy. He will talk about, in some ways, it's he sprang fully to life in 1987. Whenever his career took off and he sort of finally became really successful, that period he'll talk about. But the early years especially was I was man, this is trying to squeeze water from a rock. But I did know some people who knew him at the time. I talked to my aunt a lot, who of course remembered him well. A lot of the material memories he actually did have. My dad's a big car guy, so if I what did you drive? What were you driving when you met my mom? What were you? What kind of car did you have? It's I think if you're an Angelino, and especially if you're a 20th century Angelino, it's your car was sort of a, you remember those things. So there was part of it was these weird bits of kind of unexpected, kind of concrete details that I actually could confirm that way. A lot of the sort of landscape and that kind of stuff was library research and looking at, footage and just kind of watching endless hours of, there's it's if you go spelunking on YouTube, you'll be surprised at how much footage there is of people just driving down Wilshire Boulevard in 1955. So I was sort of I could retrieve kind names and restaurant names, because I really wanted the book to be full of kind of proper nouns and that kind of period detail. I always think about James Salter is a writer I really like, and another writer that I took a class with once, and I remember him sort of going on this rant about the poetry of proper nouns. about how, kind of like the names of restaurants and of places and of things, the very specific names, how it lends a kind of richness to fiction. And so that, like, I really looked for that stuff.
Can we talk about the actual opening?
Yeah.
Or the you and the because much like in the James Baldwin section, one of the fun tricks is you'll set up a character and not tell us who they are, and then like I find myself doing like, I know who would have been on that street in the period. Who is David or whoever? But the David Lynch opening, was that from the get-go the start?
No, actually, that was there was something else there that was much more interior, and kind of, it just felt, when I kind of went back to turn in the final draft of it, I just thought, man, this interior, I felt like I had written this opening, which I think was Mike Ovitz looking at the Jasper Johns painting, actually, which now happens later. Yeah. But I just thought, like, this. What's the thing that Orson Welles said about the Godfather? It insists upon itself. Yeah. That famous line, right? And that's what I felt. I thought, like, this opening is insisting upon itself. And then I remembered the David Lynch thing, and I mean, not remembered. How could I forget? How could I have ever forgotten? But and then I thought, yeah, that belongs at the beginning. And it was, really, that was one of the weirdest and kind of most interesting things about my childhood, was that it was less, and it was less sort of, people like, oh, you had a big Hollywood childhood. There must have been like movie stars around all the time. And like, it was like, not so much. I mean, later, but in my childhood and in my teenage years, most of who my dad represented were kind of emerging talent or kind of character actors. And the David Lynch thing was so, I mean, he wasn't, I mean, he was known for Eraserhead, but not that known, right? I mean, Eraserhead was a midnight movie. It was a cult phenomenon. But when I met him as a 12-year-old, he really was wearing these pants he had one leg that was tailored, short at the knee, like a pair of shorts, and the other was just like a long, normal pair of slacks, and they were like the color of a strawberry milkshake. It was so incredible. I just was like, who is this guy? Yeah.
That balance of like the celebrities around is something that I do want to get to a little bit later, especially as you start to be the same age. Like, there's that whole sequence with the Sheens where they're your age.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to go a little bit chronologically, just because it's already such a
sure.
But before I guess so you're talking about the character actors and the emerging talent thing, and I think something that I took away about your dad's career from the book was that was some balance between like a secret to his success and a luck of the draw, because with like New Hollywood about to hit, having Bruce Dern and Beau Bridges be overlooked until you can cast them, is great. And I'm so curious about your dad's relationship with Bruce Dern, and also all of the Beau Bridges, the landlord stuff.
I was hoping we would get to talk about that. Yes. I think that, there's a, kind of brief moment in the book where, my dad represented Jack Nicholson for about 5 minutes
which is so like angsty. They meet he sees him in a movie theater again, right? Just an actor, next client.
But my dad had taken a class. He'd been in an acting class, the acting class, Jeff Corey's acting class, with the one that Jack and Harry Dean Stanton and all those people. And my dad was never an actor. He just went to that class because he wanted to find. He was like, I gotta learn how actors are, and maybe I'll find somebody. And that's where he met Jack. And he couldn't get Nicholson a job. And that the thing about the casting director kind of lugging him out into the hall and being like, "Oh, don't bring me guys like this. He's nobody's going to hire this guy. He's not hireable. So some of that was timing. And I think it was sort of the same. My dad picked up on Danny DeVito very early. Around the time of Cuckoo's Nest. He was actually interested in DeVito in Danny as a director, because Danny had done a film called Minestrone. But it was like, to have taken Danny on as a client, like nobody would imagine that guy was ever going to be a movie star, right? So my dad thought he could be. But in the sort of new Hollywood era, the guys that my dad wound up representing, the Beau Bridgeses, he had Beau, he had Bruce Dern, he had Stacy Keach for a minute. He had, I think he launched a sort of concerted and yet ultimately unsuccessful pursuit of Warren Oates, where he followed Warren Oates down to Mexico to try to court him on the set of Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, and that didn't. He just couldn't get Warren to sign. But these were people that were not quite stars, right? I mean, they were leading men. They could, you could cast them as the lead in a movie, but they did not become stars. And and I think in Bruce's case, there was maybe some disappointment that attached to that. I think Bruce always kind of wished he had Jack Nicholson's career. Although if you look at the long arc of Bruce's career and the work he's done in the last couple decades, it's like, that's a great career, man. That is so much better than some guy being a big star for 6 years and hearing. And Beau, I don't know if Beau even wanted to be a star. He's an actor. He wanted, he really did. I think my dad did try to get him to do Love Story, and he was like, "Fred, this script is awful." And my dad was like, "Yeah, it's gonna be a big hit. This sucks." And The Landlord, which you did. Yeah, I'm dying to see the short you did. That.
Yeah.
I don't have that DVD. That was, my dad had signed Beau. I think had just gotten Beau involved in Christian. He had signed Beau off of the Christian Liquor Store, the movie that he'd done before that, which was not a hit. And then cast him in The Landlord. And I don't think The Landlord was really a hit either, but it's such an amazing movie.
Yeah. I mean, to your point about not having that DVD, somebody told me that the studio only like in the last year made a DCP, like a modern movie theater version of that film, which is incredible to anybody who doesn't know the movie. It was Hal Ashby's first thing. It's got a great cast. It was everyone I've ever talked to. I'm working on a larger thing now that The Landlord is kind of one of like the three centerpieces of.
Yeah.
Everyone we talk to is like, that is the most incredible movie that Hal Ashby ever made, that Beau was ever in, and how a film like that could be lost.
Yeah. Well, Bill Gunn too. I mean, somebody has to bring Bill. I mean, I'm obsessed with Bill Gunn.
Yes.
It's somebody has to get a Stop legitimately released. And reissue his novels. That Bill Gunn is I think in many ways like that's where it all came from, right? I mean, he wrote it. Hal Ashby obviously could see, it was perfect for Hal's sensibility because it's satirical and it's raw, but it's neither soft nor mean, right? It's like, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And like, sometimes I wonder, like, did it come just a little too early in that new Hollywood period that they weren't? But then there's also like that movie feels so contemporary that like maybe it was still too far ahead of its time.
I think so. I mean, personally, I think so. I mean, not to get too lost in talking about The Landlord. Yeah. God knows if anybody watching this has seen it or if everybody has, but it is a great film about a trust fund kid who buys a building in Brooklyn and basically is the only white person in the neighborhood and about his misadventures in doing it. But it's a fantastic movie, and I think it is I think it's ahead of its time, and I think people are probably a little confounded by its tone, because it's neither it's neither just if all it did was, eviscerate the the Beau's character, the sort of wealthy white dude, that would be one thing. And if all it did were kind of turn it into some kind of like sappy white savior story, that would be another. And it's like, truthfully, like, people probably would have embraced one of those things, but because it does neither, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's just I think it just freaked people out, and they just didn't know what to make of it.
Do you remember if that was like a hard sell for Beau? Like, when did your dad bring that to him? Did Hal already know that he wanted him? What was that?
You know what? I don't know, but I can certainly find out. Yeah. I mean, and I'd like to know too, to tell you the truth.
So, and I mean, that's one of the great things about the like generational element of this book, because there's the generational thing, but there's also the eras. Like, your dad is there, like, the 50s, that like, what are we even doing? The studio system's still intact, into New Hollywood, and then into the 80s. And I guess you're just starting to, I guess, be a cognizant person in that sort of Jaws, Star Wars, and the like blockbusters are starting to be a thing now period. And I guess I'm wondering, do you remember like your dad feeling like, oh, the business is now changing, or your friends or your mom being aware of this, or was it just like a slow?
I think it was a slow thing. And what's interesting, in many ways, the project of this book, was just wanting to write about, the way that people, that people are really, embedded in history, right? Everybody is. And as you get older, you start to realize how that was true, right? You never know it at the time. And you just don't, you can sort of say to yourself like, wow, this is historic. But when you kind of look at but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of the long arc. Like, when I look back and I sort of realize that, like, my dad's career was created by the exact place and time where he found himself, and that, it's not an accident that he became, that him and his agency kind of took off during the sort of Reagan, the Reagan era and the deregulation era. It's like the sort of arc of my family's history is, incredibly in touch with the kind of arc of American history over the late 20th century, and I knew going in that that they were, not just in a kind of abstract way of sort of like, and during the Reagan era he got rich, but in the sense that they were really like close to the historical actors of this period, that like that my mom knew, and that my parents were had contact with Huey Newton and the Panthers and the sort of radical politics of the late 60s, just because Hollywood did, right, that there were those points of contact.
To the radical politics of the time, one of my favorite sequences that I did not see coming is that the piece where your parents go undercover to look for housing inequality. That was so cool. That was
a big thing of that was my mom who really drove that bus. She founded this thing called the West Side Fair Housing Council, and it was because of suddenly I'm like, what was the name of the proposition? There was like, basically there had been a discriminatory law passed that had been overturned, but that landlords weren't renting to Black tenants, and that was something that my mom felt really was really irate about. So she and my dad together would go and pose as prospective couples, for units where they knew that the Black families had been rejected. And they would bust the landlords that way to get them fined, which is really like, it is wild. That is an entirely true story. And it's like, there's some like correspondence that I have of like, between, my mom and other kind of activists about that. It really, my parents were, they were pretty right on. They were good people, and that part was really, I was a little kid, so I don't really have any like firsthand memory of their doing that, but that is exactly what they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got a slideshow from some stuff from the book, some stuff that you just sent over.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through some of those bits?
Yeah, I see a question in the chat, by the way.
Yes.
About my mom. We will certainly get to that.
Definitely. Yeah, we're going to hit both of those after the slideshow.
And a little bit of hazing from a friend of mine, Peter Alexandrovich. I just want to say Royce Clayton. So here's my dad as a young man, as a baby faced. This would have been, I think, early William Morris. Like, that's probably shortly around the time I was born, I think.
How old do you think he is at this point then?
He's in his 30s. He's in his early 30s, I think. Mid 30s. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's my mom. So my mom had sort of a she was many things. She grew up here. Both of my parents did, and she came from a sort of I don't know. I think kind of a patricia, kind of a waspy family, and her mom was someone who just thought that what my mother needed to do was get married. That was it, right? Any sort of ambitions she might have had for her own life or career were less important than finding a husband, which I think was generationally common. But my mom was someone with creative capabilities and artistic interests. But although it took her a while to kind of work up the courage to pursue them. She'd been married once before to a man who she was married very briefly before my dad to a man who then came out of the closet and admitted that he was gay. So they divorced. And then she met my dad when she was working as a secretary. And then she was indeed working as a secretary, though she didn't want to be. And then when they were together and when my sister and I were quite young, that was sort of when her kind of more activist tendencies took off, and then even for a while after that, she was a school teacher at an experimental high school. So she was kind of involved in education, and all of that was sort of the preamble to becoming a screenwriter, which she eventually did.
The look at your mother through her literary influences on you is so powerful in this one. There's the book that she gives you that you then chase for years, trying to get made into.
Yes, surely has. Yeah.
And I mean, did any version of that ever?
No, it came very close. I mean, and recently it was a movie that got priced. It was a script that people really loved, and so it was like we as with any movie, it's like trying to get, and particularly with a studio movie, it's like you're trying to get everybody to say yes at the same time, right? So so if someone is if you're waiting too long to fill one piece, you end up losing another. But that was a movie that I think ultimately was a casualty of the fact that we couldn't get as is also expressed in the book, the idea that the kind of the middle class movies that were budgeted between $10 million and $80 million, that used to be quite common in the 80s and 70s and 80s. I mean, budgets were lower then, but proportionally, the idea that a studio would make a sort of a drama, they would cast stars and they would spend something in a middle budget range. And that's just not, that became something that studios were unwilling to do. They would make independent movies and they would make, big budget movies. And because this script was neither, it was too expensive. We couldn't get the budget under 10. And we couldn't, we just could never quite, we never quite got the right allotment of stars. There were amazing actors that were attached to it. Guy Pearce was attached to it. Jennifer Jason Leigh, Peter O'Toole was attached to it. Kate Hudson for a while. There were all these kind of crazy ideas of like, oh, maybe Keanu Reeves. you wanted to do it. But there were, and then we just couldn't. We were like, nobody was ever able. We couldn't get all the right people to say yes at the right time.
And no other iteration ever happened. The studio never came back to it 20 years later.
No, it's also just the rights situation is complicated because
that's right. That was
so it's like, this theoretically, like the script could be retrieved, and I do still get emails from people who are like, I love that book, like, can we, what would it take to get that book get the option rights to that book back? And I would be like, it would take hard work. It would probably take me, because the people who own, it's like, it's now kind of like buried deep in the, Universal owns it, but, I don't think anybody at Universal is aware that they own it, because it was purchased almost 40 years ago, 45 years ago. Yeah.
And your mother had been at the center of like some screenwriting drama.
Yeah, it's very mystifying. The first movie she ever wrote, it was a rewrite job that was kind of, my dad kind of had a client who needed a movie to be remade, a script to be rewritten. And, my mom always claims that the script was allegedly that the studio had passed, and so it was effectively a dead script. I don't think that's true. I think she knew that. I think it was a thing that if the movie could be rewritten in time, it would get a green light. And she rewrote it she was not a Writers Guild of America member, because she'd never written a script before, but she wound up rewriting this script during the Writers Guild strike of 1981. And then, and that's scabbing, which for someone with my mother's politics is both a shocking thing for her to do, because she really, she was pretty passionate about labor. But she did it, and it wound up getting her blackballed from the Writers Guild.
Wow. Yeah. And the in the book, you have this really unique balance of like, how much did your dad know? Was he doing her a favor? Was he using
Yeah, I think that, two things. I think because it was, the timing, and yet he really didn't talk about this in a lot of ways. I think even if he did, I would never know, because, I think that my mother's drinking had really become a bit of a problem, which I think was her kind of, clouded her judgment in all kinds of ways. And I think that he needed to get out of the marriage, and he was trying to sort of help her do something that was going to help her kind of realize what she really wanted to do with her life. But I also think that he knew that if this script could be rewritten, that, that not only might my mother gain a screenwriting career, but, his client's movie was going to go. So there was a selfish reason that he probably was involved in, encouraged her to do it too. I think, speaking as a kind of WGA member myself, I have to say I am very disappointed in my mom, and in a lesser way, a little disappointed in my dad's encouraging her to do it, but I do understand why.
That whole sequence is so fascinating.
Yeah.
In the how the two of them interact through it.
Yeah.
Oh, this one's you.
Yeah, that's me. It was me once upon a time.
Which period is this?
That's like 85. That's Hampshire College. That is actually, I can tell you exactly when that is. That would have been the Christmas break after I took the class with Baldwin.
Oh, cool. Okay.
That's when that was.
Bruce?
Yeah, that's Bruce on the set of a movie called Wonton, the Dog That Saved Hollywood.
This was a picture that was made?
It was a picture that was made. It was not, and I can't remember what he wrote. It says, Fred sure booked me with a dog, for God's sake. Might as well. Yeah, I don't know. That's one of those movies I don't think I ever saw it. It was obviously not a hit. It was one of Bruce's less inspired choices, but I love that picture.
Would you say that he was the client your dad was closest with?
Yeah, they were really. I mean, the thing about I don't know if all agents do this, but my dad really, there are certain clients that he just kind of identifies with in this certain way. And I think, and he's close with all of them in different ways, but I think Bruce was very important to him in the 70s. I think Danny DeVito and he had a certain kind of relationship in the 80s and early 90s. I think he and Morgan Freeman have had a kind of relationship in more recent years. And I always feel like there's some aspect of the client that rubs off on him. That it's sort of like, Bruce was an ultra marathoner. So my dad like took up running. He became a runner. In his Danny DeVito era, that sort of corresponded with like, kind of like cigars and sort of like Italian cooking. His pursuit of, when he finally got Morgan to sign with him, he celebrated by piercing his ear, which he'd always told Morgan that he was going to do that. But I think that, it's like, and that's an easy thing to sort of, think might be a little goofy, but I find it pretty sweet. It speaks to, a way in which that relationship is very, he takes it very personally. I don't think his clients are instrumental to him. I think he actually has a kind of unusual depth of care about about not just their careers, but sort of about who they are as people. Bruce and his beautiful wife, Andrea. Those were that, and I can't remember where that was taken. I have a feeling it might have been on the set of the picture that Bruce, the one where Bruce shoots John Wayne. I think that might be Posse, but I don't know for sure. Could have been Vacation too. That's my dad and Maude Adams, and Maude is I think that is Christian Licorice Store.
Oh wow!
I think right. I'd have to Google, but I think she's in that with him. I love the mustache. It's a very sweet and innocent. So 1969.
He looks so different from the 50s period. He's moving with the times.
Yeah. Well, look at that. I love the records and the little hi-fi on the shelf behind them. It's very everybody looks so young. Just Bo looks like with the kind of Beach Boys, kind of haircut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cute. Oh yeah, this so my dad is you can see my dad kind of he's the one in the back with the gray chin beard. This is 1989, and it's a trip that my dad took to Poland with De Niro to meet with Lech Walesa. I think there was this was during the sort of like the Polish Solidarity movement, and I think there was some conversation of De Niro playing Walesa in a motion picture, in a biopic of some kind. I have to say there are a lot of pictures from this trip. Many of them feature my dad more prominently, but also a lot of them feature Roman Polanski, who was also on the trip and involved in this venture. My less favorite photos include Roman. Yeah. Oh yeah, Less Than Zero era. 88, I think 87, 88. That's at a place on Ocean Avenue that's long gone called Cafe Casino, and it's the model. It's the that's the cover photo, obviously.
Yeah. It's a great picture.
Look at those Ray-Bans. This is early 90s. These are the two architects of CAA, both of whom loom large in the books. That's Mike Ovitz in the center, who was really the most powerful man in Hollywood, and then Ron Meyer, who was also enormously powerful and became even more so. He ran Universal for a couple of decades, and I love Ronnie's kind of long, the shaggy hair and the deep Malibu tan, and in a lot of ways they were sort of like perfect bookends, these guys who ran the company, because Ovitz was the sort of guy who had the more kind of Machiavellian power move, and Ronnie was the guy who was just pure, just everybody loved him and still does for good reason. He's sort of one of one of Hollywood's great gentlemen, even though he was you know, he left Universal after being involved with a younger actress. I think there was a sort of scandal about that, but Ronnie was never you know, it wasn't a Me Too thing. It was just a sort of corporate politics thing.
HR problem.
Yeah. Well, except for it wasn't an employee.
Okay.
So
This is your dad.
Yeah, my dad again. I'd say shortly after it's a little later than the Christian liquor store. It's probably like 71.
Okay.
I love is it a wine glass or a highball? You know, like or you know I love the cups. A little.
I'm imagining that it's like an espresso martini because it's so dark. That's not quite what it is.
Got that look and a little silver cigarette box.
What a vibe.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's all these pictures have that.
Oh yeah, I wanted. Can you recognize which script this is or what?
Yeah, oh, I know exactly what it is. This is the script that my mom rewrote during the Writers Guild strike.
Oh yeah, okay.
Of the movie was released under the rather lame title of Love Child.
Who ended up being the stars of that?
It was an actress named Amy Madigan. It was her.
Oh yeah, no,
Amy's a great actress, and it was her debut.
That's right. I'm silly. I have a whole thread about this because we just re-released an Amy Madigan picture that we had restored recently. And
amazing!
In the middle of that coming out, I was reading your book and realized, this was her first movie. I had no idea.
Yeah. It was so the script is about the story is about a woman named Carrie Jean Moore who's real, who was arrested. She was hitchhiking, and then she got picked up, and then the person that she was hitchhiking with, they stopped, and he robbed a convenience store, and she wound up going to prison, and then getting knocked up by one of the guards, who was played by Beau Bridges. You know, it's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie.
Sounds compelling.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think in many ways the reviews were pretty kind, but some of them were sort of like, "Isn't this kind of more of a TV movie?" And to be perfectly honest, I kind of think it was. Larry Pierce was the director, and you know, Larry. I like Larry's first movie, The Incident, quite a bit, but I think Larry was a bit of a journeyman. You know, not the kind of person who could really, you know, kind of lift this into, you know, kind of elevate it in terms of scale.
Sure.
But there it is.
There's your mom, right?
There she is again. Oh yeah, there she is in her. That's 70s era. Turtleneck period. Again, probably about around the same vintage as my dad in the previous photo where he's sitting in the chair with the espresso martini or whatever it is. It's that's probably 71, 72. College graduation. And you can see, you know, I think my mom, that was kind of when my mom's drinking had became tougher, and you can kind of see it in her face, unfortunately.
Your dad running, you mentioned.
Yeah, he's running. That's actually, he and I would go running a couple times a week for a while with Scott Newman, the other person in that photo is Paul Newman's son, who died not long after this photo.
That's right.
Yeah, he overdosed.
We had their daughter on this program like a year ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So that's okay.
Yeah. That's Bruce Dern's house or you know, that's not his actual house. That's me at the beach, visiting him in the colony, jumping off of a little sand embankment into you know, one of those rivers of not very clean runoff. The 70s, I think, you know, I you know what, you know, it's like whatever it is, it's like, you know, not sewage, but not rainwater either.
I want to open up to questions, but to kick that off, I had one question about a part with your mom and then a larger question. But in terms of the part with your mom,
we
were talking about her literary influences over you, and we talked a bit about the book that she had given you. But the thread, the James Joyce thread,
Yeah.
you set up early on that she's been reading this book and waiting to read this book and carried it from house to divorce to husband. And then the final payoff, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, is that you kind of recreate that famous Wednesday cyclical.
Yeah. The guy, it becomes a kind of a loop. Yeah.
When did you decide you were going to do that?
I think that, the funny thing about endings with books for me is that I always have a sense about halfway, maybe a little more than half, about 2/3. I get a sense of an ending, and it usually amounts to a last word. It's a very weird thing. It's like, it's literally a word. And I know it's that word, and which is a very strange way to kind of, but it's always correct. I mean, this is my fifth book, and it's been true for all the predecessors. And but in this case, it was, obviously it's not a word, right? The book ends mid-sentence. And I knew I was going to do that. Again, I think roundabout. As soon as the Joyce stuff, was kind of asserting itself in different ways in the text, not just by talking about it being my mom's favorite book, but I could just, there were little bits of Joyce that were kind of echoed in the language itself throughout. And then I realized, this is a book about film, and it's a book about time, really. I mean, really, in a lot of ways, this is a book about a subjective experience of time, and that it kind of needed that it was going to have a circular shape, and the kind of the Finnegan's Wake thing played so cleanly into that. I mean, what I think was weird was that I didn't have a word, so in a way that made it harder, because it's like I realized that I would have to end it. However I was going to end it, I might have to go back and doctor the beginning a little bit to kind of figure out, and that's what I did. Yeah. I mean,
Okay, so as we get some more questions in, my macro inquiry for you is, between all of the eras of Hollywood that your dad was dealing with, and then your periods as a screenwriter, as an agent, the development period.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting right now.
Yeah.
What has changed? What is about to change? Why? What is your viewpoint, with half of the 20th century of Hollywood in your brain, on how things are right now and how it's affecting the art, the audience, all of that?
Oh boy. Well, look, I mean, the whole kind of long arc of Hollywood, and I do think that like it's pretty much over, just in terms of sort of the I don't mean that like movies are over, people aren't going to watch them, people aren't going to see them, people aren't going to make them. All of that is true, but as a kind of like, as a dominant cultural industry, and as a kind of like, I think that obviously studios and networks and streaming companies and all that, they're, it's like they're going to keep making content, right? And a word that I detest, not to put too fine a point on it. And and they're still going to make. Some people are going to get to make good shows, right, and good movies. It's like that's none of that's going to change. But I think the kind of ecosystem and environment. And I could say the same is true of publishing. It's like there are still really great books being written and being published, but they're not circulating in the culture the way that they used to, right? And that, I think, is the primary difference. It's that whatever movies used to be, obviously it's like you still have Superman or Oppenheimer. You have once or twice a year you have these movies that are kind of like these kind of like pop culture events that. But they're siloed. They're not in conversation with other movies in that way.
What changed?
Oligopoly. I mean, the basically like these things, all of these corporations came to be owned, vertically owned by billionaires. That's one thing. I think the other thing is the The other thing is, the shift to streaming, obviously, because I think that the things that streamers do, even if they have to this point still financed a certain number of what we still think of as films, right? They've financed David Fincher, they've financed Martin Scorsese. I think they have done that very tactically and not out of any desire to extend or preserve the cinematic art form. I think they've done it in order to finish demolishing the studios as we have always known them, right? That's kind of over. So those things are what have changed. And so it's like when you have people, it's like Brady Corbett out there making The Brutalist, or Jane Schoenbrunn out there making I Saw the TV Glow, or it's like you have these people that are making films that are ambitious in all kinds of ways, but they're not entering the culture the way that they used to. They're entering it in a kind of more piecemeal kind of way.
That actually kind of dovetails to one of the questions we've got, which is
the question.
Censorship through the lens of Hollywood.
Yes.
And like the very recent changes to that. I mean, I guess to some degree, the Colbert thing is maybe.
Yes, absolutely. And look, oh boy, this is such a massive question that I'm just.
You have 4.5 minutes to
yeah,
to
well,
answer.
that's good. Well, I mean, the first way to get through it, I mean, just is even before you speak as an artist, to speak as a citizen, right? To say, free Palestine, and fuck ICE and all of those sentiments that go with that. And I think, how writers and filmmakers and educators can get through this beyond speaking privately, which I think we just have to do, right? Endlessly and ongoingly. And it's, it's hard sometimes to sort of think about like what constitutes meaningful speech, right? It's like you can post about something endlessly, or I can, but I think is this effective political speech, or is it just
Helping your Instagram algorithm for them
Yes,
to get more ads anyway?
Yes, that's what I mean. It gets very. I mean, what writers and filmmakers and educators have to do is try to recognize what is the most kind of meaningful, amphitheater in which I can articulate these positions, right? And I would argue that amphitheater is not necessarily the one of tech platforms, right? I mean, we have to use them, but I mean, in many ways, I think that art, the classroom, community meetings, community activism, like, that is where I think the speech is, one's speech is most valuable. And obviously it gets harder when you're trying to write a book or make a movie and needing to distribute it, needing to promote it through, there's no way to sort of get around those platforms, but I think, you have to funnel through them because we all have to live with them. But I do think that like trying to speak, not just on them, but but to speak apart from them, and then push, push it every way you can.
Is there a systemic thing that, both having lived through this and now rethinking about it all again, that you feel like if contemporary CAA tweaked one thing, or if Warner Brothers tweaked one thing, it would help balance out?
I don't think so. I mean, the thing about Warner Brothers is it's like everything is. I mean, CAA, which is now owned by a private equity firm in France, majority owned. The fact is that like all of these places are so vertically dominated, right? The sort of decision making process is so, it's like HBO, which is owned by Warner Brothers, trying to get David Zaslav, who I think is an easy guy to demonize, but I think even him, it's like in some weird way, it's like he's just a sort of amalgamation of kind of perceived shareholder will. It's like all of these places are just trying to, they're not interested in making decisions. They're just interested in stock price. and what's the terrible phrase? Creating value for shareholders, and that makes it. I mean, we see this kind of cravenness everywhere, right? We see this cravenness in kind of the way that all of our journalistic institutions and every politician, including many Democratic ones, are just folding, right? They're preemptively caving.
Preemptively, yeah.
Preemptively caving, and I think on some level, it's like it's all you can do to not preemptively cave yourself as an artist, as a reader, as a viewer, as a person, as an activist. However, one can manage, to be active. Every channel counts, right? It really does. But yeah, for the time being, I have no optimistic wisdom to dispense. I mean, I do because I do believe that that people are resilient enough, and that history is perverse and unstable enough, and we know this. We know that stuff like this it's not going to last forever. So you really just have to resist it at every step, every way we can.
Is your dad still in the center of any of the intrigue?
I mean, I think he still goes to work. He's 92 and he's still very active on behalf of his clients. But I think he even he knows he knows it's not the industry he entered.
He had the right period, and
yes,
the rest of it's out.
He knows he was there for the right time. But it was the last right time. Doesn't mean it was the only right time.
Yeah.
Right.
There could be another one.
It's just not going to work the way that it used to work. That's all it means. It'd just be like, do I think that there's going to be a renaissance where the American public is going to movie theaters to watch middle budget movies made by Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox and Paramount Pictures again? Of course not. Do I think that American cinema, the art form, has an ongoing future, or that world cinema does? Of course it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on that slightly optimistic
note,
thanks. This book really just went through me. And it's one of those things where I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get around to that, and the copy that they sent just came on the right day, and I did not put it down. So thank you. I hope everybody. That's a good beach read.
By the way, I'm very happy to see a comment here from my friend Elisa Petrini, we were a dear friend of mine from New York back in the day, and who actually appears in the book briefly in a scene with my friend Raymond Bongiovanni, who was the guy who put together Fight Club. And
we didn't even get to talk about the
There's a lot. There's an awful lot in the book. Yeah.
Read the book. Did we want to say anything about Willie Wilson?
No. That was just a friend. I have a friend who teases me with the names of obscure baseball players. Willie Wilson is not obscure, buddy. So I was just.
I love that your friends come to your talks. That's the right kind of friend to have.
Yeah, no, they are for reasons other than that too.
Okay.
So, all right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. And I love the swimmer poster.
Yes. That's another movie to talk about sometime.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks, guys.
Sure. Bye.